Hello everyone, your favorite Stream Space here. Sorry it's been a while since my last video. Life is complicated. Now, to go down to the point of this video, it's no secret that I'm not a fan of D&D 6e. I know it's technically called D&D 2024 or 1D&D or whatever it is, but I call it 6e to save my sanity. And I'm not like I said, I'm not a fan of it. I don't like most of the changes they did, and I do actually want to go over it specifically in this video. I will say this, that most of the game, from what I can tell from the free players thing they give out and the bits I've read from other places, it's not all bad, but that's just because it was, ripping off the framework of D&D 5e, which is easily one of the best role-playing games ever, so, you really have to try to mess everything up here, but I want to go over some stuff I just really did not like about this edition, and why I feel it's bad for D&D going forward. Now, while I'll talk about more well-known things involving 6e later in the video, I do want to start with something I haven't heard anyone talk about before, and I think it's worth noting, is that D&D 6e has changed how encounters are designed. Specifically that, and I'm going to go over it very briefly here, that it's free rules so you can check it if you want, is that now, when a GM designs an encounter for a D&D game, he picks whether he wants it to be easy, medium, or hard, or I think it's a term they use, but I could be exactly wrong, but that concept, right? And he has an XP budget to spend on, picking what monsters he throws at the players, right? Now, at first, that didn't seem too bad to me, because at first I read it as a guideline. Oh, this is how much XP would you usually challenge, 4 players of this level or something like that. That would be fine, but that's not how this is worded. This is worded as, you build under this budget. You're supposed to be as close to the budget as possible. Preferably don't go below it. And it's not framed like a guide, oh, this is what you should do, but, do whatever. We're just trying to help you out here. No, this is framed as, how you design encounters, which is a very different concept. Now, of course, you can just ignore it, but that doesn't really negate a rule being bad if I have to rip it out in order to play D&D normally, which is a bit of a problem, as this entire system makes no freaking sense. Now, I'm not going to debate over the exact amount of XP that would challenges a player at certain levels with a certain party number, because that would take way too much testing for D&D 6e for me to ever want to do to try that. But even just going by basic logic here, for example, let's say you have an encounter that's primarily dealing with water-based creatures, creatures that go underwater, that try to drown the players, that kind of thing. That would mean be a lot more dangerous to a party, normal party, but to a party made up of, sea elves or people who have the breathe underwater spell, that's not going to really threaten them nearly as much. You have resistance to, cold damage or water-based attacks as well. It's not going to be as challenging. And this might sound like a no-duh, but it's very important, as the entire point of this thing is to give players the proper challenge for what you did DM wanted. But that doesn't work if fundamentally, based on player builds, they completely throw that out the window. It works okay as a guideline, but it falls apart under strict ruling, which is what this is, strict ruling. And also is that, what how you have spontaneous encounters? Now, I know that sounds kind of weird, but, as a GM, or even, as a player, you kind of understand this, but as a GM, you really see it. There are many times when players pick fights that you were not planning for. Either against people you didn't think they would fight, or at circumstances you didn't plan for. And, that can really throw, normally, as long as you have the stats for whatever they're fighting, or can easily make them up, it's fine. As far as a rules perspective. But in this system, how does that work? If the players, piss off a noble and decide, we're gonna kill this noble because we don't like his guts or whatever, how does that work? Is that an easy counter? But the noble is not terribly dangerous to even a low-level party on his own. So, do we have to manifest guards out of the void? Does the noble all of a sudden become a 5th-level spellcaster or something? All these things, and, granted, some of it can be hand-waved away because, the players don't necessarily know everything, but it's still a problem that GMs will have to struggle with that just didn't exist before. But moreover, this is just needlessly restricting the GM and players' creativity. It's the game literally saying, okay, now you have to know what difficulty you're going to play at now or for this fight. Don't want to surprise the players or something, or be innovative or whatever. And, that is just this needless hand-holding and very railroading on part of the game. This has never been a thing in D&D, my knowledge, and definitely not 5e. and there's no reason to add it or force it in. Like, it reminds me of, like, a system, like, in some, like, board game type things. One player is playing, like, the monster, like, the bad guy who controls the bad guy, and the other player playing the more classic adventurers, where the game gives you like, a budget on what enemies you can throw at the player. But that works because those are, like, competitive board games, where the guy controlling the monsters is another, like, traditional player who's controlling the monsters trying to beat the more traditional heroes. That works fine in a board game because the GM is playing a the quote-unquote GM-like role is playing a strictly antagonistic role, when in RPGs they don't do that. This is a system that works fine for, like, a board game like Descent or something like that, maybe, but it doesn't work in an RPG. It has no real reason to be here beyond some weird, needless hand-holding. The next thing I want to talk about is what they've done to races or now species in the game. Mainly is that they've de-important how much of a role they are in your character. You see, like, if you played D&D 5e, like you should, you would build up your character after you build up a loose idea of who you want to play, of course, or was going with the dice aside. You would build race, class, background. Now, admittedly, this makes sense from a structural standpoint, how you build a character. Not everyone builds a character. Like, some people want to play, like, a class first, or, you know, they have this idea for a character, then work their class and race into it later. But given how the old 5e used to structure, you know, how it makes sense. Your race came first. Whatever happened in your backstory or your class, you are an elf or a dwarf or whatever, and this made sense. But now in the game, it's like shuffled off. It's not even like sometimes listed as a proper step. It's just like, choose your background, although this is when you choose your species. It's like you just forgot. And this doesn't make sense for D&D because part of the fantasy of playing the game is playing these fantastical races, or if you're like me, mostly just playing humans. But humans and elves. But the thing is that this de-emphasizing of it is not at all fun in a lot of ways, because it just takes away from some of the fun of it. It just further devalues the importance of that choice. And it doesn't help that they've also removed a lot of the other more unique quirks about each race. How almost every race can now be medium or small sized. How, like, the short races don't have, like, the speed penalty they used to, and other traits like that. And then we get to losing the ability score modifiers, which has to be the dumbest thing ever seen in mankind. Like, listen, okay, I'm not opposed to backgrounds giving you, like, +2 stats and a feat. I think that's actually fine. I'm perfectly cool with that. But I think the race should still give you the bonuses. Maybe lower, like, the pool points people get. I don't know. But is that it's part of the fantasy of playing these different races. Is that elves are supposed to be nimble, so they get a dex bonus. Dwarves are strong in constitution-wise, so they get, you know, a constitution bonus, etc., etc. This was part of the fantasy and helped reinforce what these, like, different species were good at in the game and help build into their lore. A trait that is just gone now. Like, the elves, who are supposed to be all mostly nimble, are just no more nimble than anyone else now. And the problem is that it wasn't even like you couldn't play, like, a weak dwarf or a sickly dwarf or a clumsy elf. You could, but these little boosts help put you over, like, helped you and made it clear how it set the standard a little bit. And I know why they did it. They did it because they didn't want to be racist. But, like, I don't mean to alarm you, but these, like, elves and dwarves don't exist. Or if they do exist, they definitely don't represent actual human ethnicities. It's a stupid little bit of nonsense. And it's just that stupid debate of, are orcs black people again? Which is just, like, so dumb. And but once again, humans exist in D&D. Humans have inspired cultures all across D&D history. And in D&D, if you played, especially 5e, but I'm following now every edition as far as I can tell, you know, humans were just humans, and that was it. You know what I mean? If you wanted to play a white guy, or a black guy, or an Asian guy, or whatever, it didn't matter, because you were all humans. You all got the same buffs because you were all humans. And that's fine, because that's how humans work. We are all basically identical compared to the fantastical races of elves and dwarves and goblins and whatnot. So this weird, needless trying to not be racist to groups that don't exist is just needless trying to politicize things that didn't need it. And the elves and the races losing their ability score modifiers just limits how the game can buff, how it can make different races playing unique, and you can feel that in the humans. The humans are neutered in this game in 6e. There's no reason to play a human rules-wise. Every other race, people, like, humans will always, like, mid-tier, usually in D&D 5e, sometimes a little bit above, I've heard people say, but, like, in 6e, there's no reason to play a human. They give you, what, a feat and a skill? Most of the other races will give you way more than that. It's like, it's because, you know, they lost the +1s that they always gained, or the +2 and a feat. This is just needlessly damaging the humans, and it just hurts the game overall, and just shows how they're more concerned about politics over actual gameplay. And then we get to the game expectations section, or more accurately, the consent form written in another ton. And listen, okay, consent forms in RPGs are just stupid, okay? I'm done trying. I used to try to be kind of nice to them because I was like, no, you know, some people can use about. The more I look at it, the more I look at these things, and I realize how stupid they are. Because, like, if you are in a group, like I want to actually explain something to those not in the know a little bit, and some people don't constantly recognize this. That every D&D group, every RPG group, but every D&D group as well, is different. Depending on player makeup, GM style, whatever, it's going to be different. And not just because of what games they play, just what standard they find acceptable for their games. And that's perfectly fine. This is not like a chrism. This is actually part of the beauty of it, is that each group has their own style, their own way of playing, and what they allow and don't allow at their table. And usually it's pretty unconscious. You don't have to, like, sit down and be like, okay, what are we doing today? Because you understand each other as friends. Like, for example, last year I was playing in some RPG games with one group, and then ran a game of Scion for the other. It's like, I know it's not D&D most of the time, but it gets the point across here from this point. Is that in the D&D, in the group I played in, right, we didn't make, like, there weren't, like, characters trying to, like, seduce other characters or do stuff like that, right? It's just not something our characters ever did, because that's the nature of that group. Meanwhile, in the group I ran for, the Scion game, the characters would often try to charm NPCs or try to manipulate them to get what they wanted. These are just two completely different things, and that's fine. Different groups have different levels of violence or horror or dark nature stuff or whatever, because that's just how that group functions. And that's not something that has to be controlled or listed down. And, like, if there are issues, people should be adults and be, like, able to talk it out normally and not need a silly little wafer of paper to be able to play the game. And also because a lot of these things are stupid. It's like saying, how much violence do you want in a game? Or, like, do you want to be fighting monsters or do stuff like that? It's like, it just shows the misunderstanding of the fantasy. Because, like, part of D&D is exploring dungeons, fighting quests, and killing monsters. That's just part of the core fantasy of the game. Almost every group will do these to some varying levels, and trying to write it down saying, are you okay killing monsters, is stupid. And it literally is. It's almost infantilizing. And this gets to my real thing that I think that a friend actually pointed out that I didn't realize at first, but looking back on it, it's so clear. Is that, look at this game expectations area. Look at it. It has, like, a cheesy little beholder and a cute little, like, grass patch on the ground. And it's, like, so childish. It's like baby's first D&D. And listen, I'm not one of those people that need D&D to be so, it needs to be super dark and gritty and dark fantasy, killing everything. We just murdered 3 babies because it was fun. I don't want that. I don't even want that. But it's like the fact that this is what they find the universal. This is what they find universally acceptable. This is what they think the standard D&D player wants their game to be. Cute little beholder, and like, oh, how are we worried about triggering you today? You know what I mean? And not even like something serious, like dealing with like actual issues you have. Just like, are you scared of spiders? It's like, it's just so dumb. But looking back on it, is that looking at how 6e has gone, even some of the later 5e, you can tell the pattern, how they became more concerned about trying to, especially in 6e, trying to be like appeal to the lowest common denominator and trying to be it's infantilizing. They imagine the audience as being super childish. They don't want them to face challenges, and this gets into the rules on death, where it's heavily it's hard to word exactly, but it's like they kind of like try to give it like the player the power to decide if their character can actually die or not, or instead of being like, if you drop to 0 hit points, you're not actually dead, and not because like you're making death saving throws. Even after the death saving throws, you could be like, oh well, the GM doesn't have to let you do it. The players, if they don't want their character to die, no, shut up. And like that just shows you how they are less concerned with telling the game, letting the players have their fun, and more concerned about making sure they aren't hurting someone's feelings, or you're trying to make sure like everyone can be enjoyed, even if they people who wouldn't want to play the game in the first place. And it's not a politics issue strictly. It's not the game has gone woke. It's that the game is treating its players more and more like they're a bunch of children. Like a bunch of little children who can't actually deal with the fantasy game that is D&D. So instead of just being like, this is just a game. Like for example, if D&D was like a PG-13 movie, and there were a bunch of kids complaining people complaining that little kids couldn't watch the movie. And instead of being like, well, okay, D&D is just not for like little kids or that kind of denominator, sorry, or giving like an option as a side, it would be like dumbing down the entire movie to like a PG or a G rating to appeal to those people. And that doesn't always work. Like, could you imagine like the first Terminator movie as a G-rated movie? And I mean like a modern day G-rated movie. It might be funny, you could even maybe make it good, but it wouldn't be the Terminator. And trying to dumb down D&D to this super like cartoony, child-friendly state is the same way. It loses the core fantasy. And if someone wants to make an RPG that is super child-friendly like that, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. They can do that. I won't play it, but I'm not going to hate on it or anything. But the thing is, that isn't D&D. D&D is the game of almost any type of fantasy, from classic sword and sorcery, to epic fantasy, to dark fantasy, to grimdark, to almost anything you could imagine, as long as it vaguely falls in the fantasy genre. And a lot of those things need a little bit more room to breathe than what can be given under a G rating. And this is just something I think they've forgotten about in time. But overall, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the issue. What do you think about the whole thing? What do you think of D&D 60 and what I've talked about today? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.
Yeah. Hey, why don't you hit that sub button? You're gonna become a subscribble. Get to see my content quicker. Wouldn't that be nice? I bet so.